You've probably never heard of him, but the Allies called him the most dangerous man in Europe. And when you hear what he pulled off during World War II, you'll understand why. Otto Skorzeny wasn't a general. He wasn't even high up in the Nazi command structure. But somehow this Austrian-born SS officer with a jagged scar running down his face became Hitler's personal go-to man for impossible missions. A commando with movie star looks and the nerve of a war god. The year was 1943. Benito Mussolini, Hitler's closest ally, had been deposed in Italy and imprisoned in a remote, mountaintop resort called Gran Sasso. It was a place designed to be escape-proof. Too high for aircraft, too isolated for a ground assault. It was game over for Mussolini, or so everyone thought. Everyone, except Otto Skorzeny. When Hitler demanded Mussolini's return, it wasn't the generals he turned to, it was Skorzeny. Why? Because Skorzeny didn't think like a soldier, he thought like a predator. Quiet, patient, lethal, and what he planned was insane. Skorzeny proposed using glider planes, silent aircraft with no engines, to crash land directly onto the rocky plateau where Mussolini was being held. No backup, no heavy equipment, just elite commandos and sheer audacity. And he wanted to be the first man through the door. The mission, named Operation Eiche, was pure madness. The landing zone was so small that even experienced pilots thought it was suicide, but Skorzeny insisted. On September 12, 1943, the gliders took off. And what happened next? It defied every expectation. They hit the landing zone with terrifying precision. Not a single shot was fired. Skorzeny stormed the villa, confronted Mussolini's guards, and took him without a fight. Within hours, the two men were airborne again, in a tiny light aircraft barely able to lift off from the rocks. It was one of the most daring rescue missions in modern military history. But how did Skorzeny pull it off without resistance? And more importantly, what did he do next? When the small plane carrying Mussolini and Otto Skorzeny landed safely behind Axis lines, the world took notice. And Hitler? He was ecstatic. The Führer didn't just see a successful mission, he saw a symbol. Skorzeny had done the impossible. No bullets, no blood, and his closest ally was back in play. Photos of Skorzeny standing beside Mussolini circulated across Europe. He looked like something out of a propaganda poster, tall, confident, scarred like a duelist from another era. Newspapers turned him into a myth. But beneath that public image was a man already thinking 3 steps ahead. Because Skorzeny understood something most Nazi officers didn't. War wasn't just won on the battlefield, it was won in the shadows. And that's where Skorzeny thrived. After the Mussolini operation, Skorzeny's role shifted. He was no longer just a commander. He became something else, a free agent of chaos. Hitler gave him near unlimited freedom to plan, design, and lead covert operations however he wanted. His orders? Disrupt, deceive, destroy. So, while the Allied forces were advancing on every front, Skorzeny was working behind the scenes, building a new kind of warfare. He trained elite German commandos not in brute force, but in deception, disguise, psychological manipulation. He studied Allied uniforms, language, even American slang. And when the Ardennes offensive, what we now call the Battle of the Bulge, was in preparation, Skorzeny had something wild in mind. He called it Operation Greif. The plan? Take German soldiers, teach them English, dress them in American uniforms, and send them behind enemy lines during the chaos of battle. Their job wasn't to fight, it was to sabotage, change road signs, feed false information, redirect convoys, spread panic. It was espionage on steroids, and the effect, immediate. Allied troops became paranoid. They stopped trusting their own checkpoints. Rumors spread of German agents disguised as American MPs. Soldiers were detained, questioned, even shot by their own side. But Operation Greif wasn't just about confusion. It was the beginning of something darker. Because one of Skorzeny's next ideas was to kidnap the Allied command itself. Eisenhower, Montgomery, even Churchill were considered targets. But how close did he actually get? In late 1944, Operation Greif was in full swing, and Allied commanders were on edge. Reports flooded in of German soldiers masquerading as Americans, changing road signs, feeding false orders, and slipping through checkpoints. But it wasn't just the sabotage that rattled them. It was the man behind it. Skorzeny's name started circulating through Allied briefings like a ghost story. And then came the real fear. What if he wasn't just trying to confuse the front lines? What if he was coming for the top? Rumors began swirling that Skorzeny was planning to kidnap General Eisenhower, supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe. American intelligence was in a frenzy. For weeks, Eisenhower's movements were restricted. He was surrounded by extra guards, roads near his headquarters were barricaded. It was pure paranoia, and it was exactly what Skorzeny wanted. But here's the twist. There's no solid evidence that Skorzeny ever had the actual resources to pull it off. The plan may have been more psychological than tactical, because while Allied commands scrambled to protect themselves, they diverted attention and troops from actual battlefronts. Skorzeny wasn't just a saboteur, he was playing a long game of psychological warfare. And while he never got close enough to Eisenhower's door, the fear he generated was real. Commanders were wasting time verifying their own soldiers' identities, delaying operations, second-guessing every communication. It was one man, rewriting the rules of how war could be fought. And if you've made it this far into the story, then you already know. This isn't your average World War II documentary. This goes deeper. So if you're into real history that sounds like it was pulled straight from a spy thriller, make sure you subscribe. Because we dig into stories like this every week. And trust me, it gets even wilder. Because while Skorzeny was terrifying Allied generals in the West, he was also playing a much more dangerous game in the East. Black ops, shadow networks, and double crosses that make Hollywood look tame. The question is, after everything he did, who did Skorzeny really work for in the end? When Nazi Germany finally collapsed in 1945, Otto Skorzeny didn't disappear, not exactly. He was captured by the Allies and held at a detention camp. But even behind barbed wire, his legend was too slippery to hold. In 1948, he escaped. Not in the dead of night through some tunnel. No, it was almost theatrical, wearing a stolen U.S. military uniform and walking confidently through the front gate. To this day, some believe the escape wasn't just bold, it was allowed. Either way, he was gone. He resurfaced in Franco's Spain. And Spain? Well, let's just say it was the perfect place for a former Nazi with powerful friends. No extradition, no consequences. He lived in a mansion, drove fancy cars, hosted parties with ex-officers and foreign diplomats. But that wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new one even darker. Because Skorzeny started working as a military and intelligence advisor. For who? Take your pick. Argentina, Egypt, Syria. Regimes that admired his ruthlessness and wanted access to his tactics. He helped train soldiers, plan covert ops, and set up security networks. But here's the twist that historians still argue about. According to multiple sources, some even confirmed by former intelligence agents, Otto Skorzeny was recruited by Israel's Mossad. Yes, that Mossad. Allegedly, he struck a deal, protection and freedom, in exchange for taking out former Nazis who had become enemies of Israel. Some say he helped them eliminate ex-SS Zionists working for Egypt. Others believe he passed on intel that only someone like him could access. And just like that, the hunter became the weapon, in the hands of his former enemy. So here we have a man who served Hitler, escaped justice, advised dictators, and may have ended up working for the Jews, but was it true? Or another layer of myth built around a master manipulator? This story isn't just about war anymore, it's about identity, betrayal, and the strange places power hides when the spotlight fades. And in the final part of this story, we'll look at the legacy he left behind. Because the real question isn't how Otto Skorzeny lived, it's how much of him still lives on today. Otto Skorzeny died in 1975 in Madrid. No bullets, no prison, no trial. Just a quiet funeral for a man who once held Europe's most powerful leaders in a state of fear. He was 67, but his death didn't bring closure, and if anything, it deepened the mystery. To some, Skorzeny remained a Nazi loyalist to the end, a man who lived by the code of the SS, unrepentant, proud, and dangerous. To others, he was a survivor, a tactician who bent morality like a tool, fighting for whoever paid, advised whoever listened, and disappeared whenever it suited him. In the years that followed, stories kept surfacing. Skorzeny was spotted in South America, rumored to be advising juntas in Argentina and Chile. There were whispers of him helping former SS members escape through secret Nazi escape routes, the infamous rat lines. He even allegedly met with high-ranking CIA officials in post-war Europe. And maybe the strangest part? Many of the tactics Skorzeny pioneered, psychological warfare, infiltration, disguises, silent takedowns, are now standard operating procedure for modern special forces and intelligence agencies. From the Mossad to the CIA to Russian Spetsnaz, echoes of his doctrine are everywhere. Think about that. A man trained by the Nazis may have helped shape the modern shadow wars of the 20th and 21st centuries. But there's one final layer that still haunts his legacy. In the Cold War chaos, alliances blurred. Former enemies became assets, war criminals became consultants. And the truth? It drowned in silence, secrecy, and politics. Was Otto Skorzeny a relic of a brutal era, or a blueprint for what followed? That depends on who you ask. If you found this story interesting, or if you enjoy exploring the strange, dark edges of history, then follow, like, and subscribe. There's much more to uncover.